Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Firefighters podcast, where we seek to develop, inspire, and motivate the world of the emergency services operator through a series of wide-ranging conversations. Now, before we go any further, just hit that rate, follow, or subscribe button on whatever platform you're listening to. It's a key performance indicator for us and helps us reach even more people. Now, here's what we've got for you today. Today on the podcast, we're digging into the roots of firefighter fitness and how we got from local bleep tests and vibes to nationally validated standards built from actual job tasks and science. Joining me is Dr. Phil Turner, one of the key architects behind the National Fire Chiefs Council FireFit framework. Phil has spent the last 2 decades co-designing the drill ground assessments and publishing the data that define what fit for duty really means in the UK fire service. We're going to unpack where those numbers came from, the VO2 cutoffs, the strength benchmarks that mirror ladder fitness and rescues, and why being fit enough is about more than just a stopwatch or a treadmill. We'll talk about how age, body composition, and even sleep all factor into real operational safety. This conversation goes beyond testing. It's about health, culture, and what's next for the fire service as we face an aging workforce, rising chronic disease, and new challenges like climate-driven incidents. So buckle up. This one's part history lesson, part health science, and I look forward at what the next 20 years of firefighting fitness might need to be. I'll see you on the other side. I want to acknowledge the first part of our conversation today is what I really, really want for anyone that's ever listened to the podcast, which is, I've said it once, I'll say it 1,000 times, I am not the best person to be running a podcast. There are so many more educated people that I am just dipping into the river and the pool of. And one of the things that we regularly discuss on the podcast is elements of firefighter fitness, whether we're talking about health, well-being, decontamination, sleep, stress, psychologists, firefighter fitness, who can run the fastest, whatever it is. And by and large part, I fumble my way through it. I always say we're all students, just with different levels of experience. But you were kind enough to reach out to the podcast and go, Pete, heard this. Have you considered ABC? Not sure you're aware of 1, 2, 3. Think this would be really useful. And then we got into some really great conversations. And I absolutely love that. Because I'm sure some people listening to some of this stuff will go, what an absolute moron, doesn't know what he's on about, bye. And I'm like, well, lean in, let's educate. So what sort of drove you to sort of get in contact? Because as we've had our conversations, you have had a remarkable, in-depth, really immersive experience with all things firefighter health, fitness and well-being and the FireFit conferences and all that sort of stuff. When did you first start getting involved in this part of the job?
So I joined in 2000, Lancashire Fire Rescue, and I came with a sort of an interest in health and well-being, degree, health club management, but fire service was the job that I wanted to do. So I became interested in, I suppose, on entry really, although that was a sort of a passing interest, because at that stage you simply want to pass, Yeah,
and people are like, just learn the job. All right, you'll know.
Yeah. Having a comment
telling us what we're doing wrong.
Having an opinion or sort of thinking, well, don't you think we could do this a bit better? No, that's not really. So the first 2 years is more sort of observational than anything else.
What were your entry tests?
What was that?
What were your entry tests?
Yeah, so it was bleep test.
Okay.
But the interesting one was hose running. So you had to run out and you had to run out and make up 6 repeats, lengths of hose in a time of, I am going to say, just over 11 minutes. I think 11 minutes was, but I think you got points for how fast you did it, but there was a cutoff.
Was it what, 11 wasn't the cutoff?
I think if you did it under 11, you were in the sort of top tier. And if you did it over 11, but under, I can't remember the top, that you were in the sort of the second half. And you got points depending on that. It was never, transparency wasn't really the thing back then. So, I'm not going to disclose who I didn't like you. I won't disclose who I failed with, but I failed with a fire service based on, I asked them for feedback and they said a lack of technique. So, which is an interesting comment when you've never been in the fire service, but
Yeah. Let me test you on something you've never done. to see if you
Yeah.
can do it. Well, I'm pretty sure I can
Yeah.
do it because it's just physical capabilities and some skill-based familiarity. But off the
Yeah.
jump, yeah, I hate stuff like that. We still do that with some promotional processes now. They ask you about a job you haven't got yet. Now, you should have an interest in it and all that jazz. But if
Yeah.
they said, do this, you'd be like, well, I've not done the course. So why are you asking me about hazmat specifics or whatever it is? Anyway, so you did your fitness tests. I interrupted you, sorry.
No, no, not at all. So I did my fitness test, got through, and yeah, as with all things back then, it was a bit of a mystery. You've sort of you reach these barriers, and I was being tripped up at various stages, and all of a sudden I progressed through, got to interview, very short interview, and I was offered the job. So yeah, after failing at various stages to then get through almost super quick was a bit of a surprise. But I got through with Lancashire, and 2 years into the job, I started asking questions about the tests that were being used, both partly at entry, but mainly in the job. So in the job, we were doing a bleep test, and we were doing a ladder extension test.
It was like an annual fitness test. You had to do the ladder
Yeah,
extensions.
linking
Right.
to an annual fitness test. Yeah, but the
What
bleep
was the
test was
marker for the bleep test? What did you have to get to?
so that was equating to, so it was 995. It was equating to a VO2 max or above of 45. So you have to have a VO2 of at least 45 or above. But when we were asking, well, what was that based on? It was an average score of research, which was done mainly abroad.
Okay.
So the applicability then becomes a little bit tenuous. Firefighters, we are very similar, but populations differ, and equipment differs, and procedures differ. So
there's nothing wrong with coming up with a temporary yardstick as a base
Yeah.
of comparison. Because if we'd accidentally created a weird new sector within the sector, weird new work stream in the sector, like AI and technology and whatever, and we said, oh, well, what do you need to be a good AI worker in a job like this? You'd probably go into other sectors and try and take a sample test of what their role maps are on what they have to do, and then adapt it to your particular organization, like the fire service, and go, what do we want our version of that to be? But that shouldn't be something that stays in place for 20 years. Once you've got time for a bit more research. We do that with a lot of stuff, though, don't we, with international studies? I don't know why, though, because we did used to do a lot of research in the UK, and I know you've been part of a lot of research, but often it's a case where it's like someone's whispered something in the next room, and then we've interpreted it in the UK, which sounds like that's what's happened in that sort of case. They've just taken some data they've had on an international visit and said, yeah, that'll do.
Yeah, I mean, there is a sort of a rationale for that. When you are talking about cardiovascular fitness, then cardiorespiratory fitness, then a VO2 score of 42 does seem to be reasonably universal amongst firefighting populations. So, it does reflect the sort of cardiorespiratory demands of the job, and that does seem to be reasonably consistent. Where it becomes tricky is when you have a criterion-based test. So when you're using actual fire service equipment and you're then mapping that VO2 standard to your criterion-based test. So you have to then have a thorough task analysis done on the job that you are basing the test on in order for your test to be legally robust. Because if somebody fails, and obviously often if
we've struggled with legally robust in the fire and rescue service over the years, not because we're illegal, just because it's been a lot of isms for a lot of generations, hasn't it? And also, we work so siloed. I imagine it's far worse, like when you joined 2 decades ago, and worse, not worse before, but people probably didn't know the extent to how siloed they were.
No, and I think it wasn't really, and I think this reflects maybe society generally. You didn't generally challenge I mean, whether it be the doctors, whether it be occupations, whether there were people in professional positions, you generally didn't challenge decisions.
No.
It wasn't. But now I think with the internet, to be honest, it's made information far more accessible and transparent. I think people are more. I think there is more information. People are more prepared, more confident to challenge. That brings with it other issues, I think. But I think in that respect, people are more empowered now. And so you have to be more prepared for people to ask questions, and see that as an advantage and move things forward. So, I started to ask questions.
This episode is brought to you in partnership with Godiva Limited. Godiva is one of the world's leading providers of specialist equipment for emergency services market. Godiva produces a comprehensive range of fire pumps, including vehicle-mounted, portable, and their cutting-edge integrated total water flow control system, SAMFlows. I've been using Godiva my entire career as a reliable pump on the fire ground. It is such a crucial element of a successful firefighting team that you want to empower your crews with the very best, reliable, quality product. Reach out to our partners by checking the notes in the podcast. Now back to the show.
And back in Lancashire, that then started the process of sort of my skill sets improving. So that started with a master's at the University of Chester.
Started with a master's. That doesn't sound like something I would start with. I know you had a degree already, but
the journey I went on started with a master's. So I had the opportunity to run a project in Lancashire which looked at the tests that they had in-house, and I asked various questions. Mainly were the tests reflective of the job, so and key tasks in the job. So were the strength-based tests reflective of the job, and was hose running that they were using at the time, was that reflective of the job? So if you had a VO2 of 42 or above, how did you perform in hose running? Because at the time you had to complete hose running tests. Yet when you ask the question, well, that's fine, but there's a real skill component to that. So how do we know whether, if you are really fit, but you are not particularly skilled at hose running, what does that really mean? So are we testing fitness? Are we testing capability? Because that's fine if we're doing both, but we need to be honest about what the test is. So I did some comparative tests.
With what?
So I compared the bleep test with hose running.
Okay.
And I compared the pull-down ladder extension test, which they were running at the time. I think you had to extend the 30.5 in under 25 seconds. So I compared that test with 1 rep max tests, bench press, and there was a correlation. But in all honesty, it was more of a cutoff. So if you were a certain strength, you were more likely to perform well in the tests. But it wasn't really a linear relationship. So it was quite tricky to describe. You could set a minimum. But again, there were people who were under the minimum who would pass, and people who were over the minimum who would fail. So
as in they were always under the minimum for the VO2 max, but they would still be able to achieve the criterion for those tests.
Yeah, there weren't many in that category, but they were there. So, you then got to be honest about, okay, these tests are not perfect, but what do we know? Well, we know that, a cutoff of 42, you are far more likely to be able to pass the hose running that was in place at the time. Now, okay, so do we have 42 as a cutoff, or do we have, something slightly less as a cutoff and give somebody the opportunity to then do the hose running test? Because ultimately,
did you also go deeper? Sorry, because there's several things I'm really, really disciplining myself, even though I am interrupting. I'm like, there's a few things I want to ask about. If you even went back to why 6 lengths in 11 minutes? What's the 11 minutes for? Is that based on setup time for an incident? Is that based on a hose relay requirement? Is it what you know what I mean? Like, you
That's a
have to
really good
evidence
question.
that as well, don't you? You almost have to go beyond the second or third why
Yeah.
and go, well, yes, we want people to do it, but why not 10 lengths? Why not one
Yeah.
length? What's this? Do you know what I
And
mean? Is that,
that
I
was
don't
the
know.
path I started on. So ultimately, although there was a relationship between your VO2 score and your performance on the hose running, and a relationship between 1 rep max and your performance on the ladder extension, why 25 seconds? Why
Mm,
6 lengths?
mhm.
So that's where you then have to say, well, we haven't done a job task analysis.
Okay.
And if you haven't done that, where's your justification for 6 lengths? I mean, for instance, we don't run out and make up hose in the same movement.
No,
We run out, we then,
not really bothered how long it takes you to make it up, to
but
be honest with you.
exactly,
Within an
exactly.
hour would be good, but I don't want you claiming overtime every time just because we didn't ask you to make up hose quickly. If it
Yeah.
takes you 3 hours and you're saying, well, there's no standard. As I suppose, there is a standard need for everything. But the more time urgent stuff, the high risk stuff, the likelihood of injury if you're not capable of doing it is like 6 lengths to me says, we're getting to a high rise. You've got a twin feed, the pump, bang, go. You're 2 lengths away, 3 lengths away. Okay, I want you to bang out 3 or 4 quickly. Maybe an argument there, but yeah, you've really got to try and pull yourself out of that unconscious bias and ask yourself, yeah, great, but why? Why that? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. So these are the questions that we asked. In my master's, I came into contact with a guy called Professor Kevin Sykes at the University of Chester, who had for many years already been involved in research, health, fitness standards research with the fire service. And he mentioned Firefit. And Firefit were part of the Chief Fire Officers Association. They were a steering group who simply advised. They brought together a group of like-minded individuals from occupational health, senior managers, fitness advisors, and they examined the guidance and looked at where we needed to go, what we needed to do. And we started to talk about what the next steps needed and to look like. Who did we need to ask? And C4 at the time came to Firefit and said, "Look, we need to underpin. We need to look at our standards, and they need to be underpinned with robust evidence. So, are our standards fit for purpose? And what do they need to be, and what is the rationale, what is the evidence which will underpin these standards?" And that was a conversation we started over a period of 2 years, eventually culminating in a relationship with the University of Bath, the Fire Research and Training Trust, and ourselves in Firefit. So myself and Rich Stevenson, who was in South Wales Fire and Rescue at the time, the senior fitness advisor, we then positioned ourselves in order to be able to do a PhD. I focused on the health and well-being side of the research, and Rich focused on the fitness standards. So we encouraged the conversation to include, well, if you want people to be fit enough, you need to understand the motivations, the characteristics, what do they need to have in place in order to achieve the standards? So it's one thing designing the tests and having the job task analysis to support that. But if you want people to stay fit over a 30, 40-year career, you're going to need to understand so much more than what the tests are. So that's where the health and well-being came in, and that's where my sort of PhD sort of started.
When you look at VO2, because I don't want to, it's going to be my job to keep hitting the pause button so we don't lose anybody in the terminology. There are a lot of people will maybe be familiar with what VO2 max is. Likely not, to be honest. They've probably just seen it written on something and they know they have to hit a certain amount. But, whilst most people joining the fire service will have some element of sporting background, potentially, even if they just did it at school, most won't really know what that looks like in practice. So what actually is VO2 max? What is it? What am I measuring in the body?
Yeah. So you're measuring the maximum amount of oxygen that the body can take in, transport, and deliver to the working muscles. So that is more often than not measured in relative terms.
Okay.
So relative to your body weight, how much oxygen do you take in, deliver to the working muscles? It can also be measured in absolute terms. That is an argument which we can discuss about that regarding load carrying tasks, but typically it's measured in relative terms. So the 42 is 42 milliliters per kilogram per minute. So it's milliliters of oxygen per kilogram of body weight per minute of exercise. So that's VO2 max. Now, VO2 is the volume of oxygen that's being used. It may not be VO2 max. So often the tests that are used, the surrogate tests, let's call them either the bleep test or treadmill-based tests, whatever they may be. If you've got a VO2 score above 42, then you will not be taken to VO2 max, or you shouldn't be, for the purposes of those tests. Ideally, you wouldn't want to take someone to VO2 max. So
why?
VO2,
Because I might die.
Cutoff. Well, you're going to incur risk, which maybe is unnecessary. And ideally, you want to have a fitness buffer. So, if we've got an occupational fitness standard of 42, you don't want people's VO2 max score really to be 42. You'd like it to likely be above that, so you can actually achieve a score of VO42 while still being able to carry out other tasks. And also, a lot of these things are not done in isolation. So if you're going to execute these various physical tasks, they're not going to be one or two. They're going to be either protracted, or you're going to be multiple tasks that you do in any one time. So really, although occupational standards are often a cutoff score, it's a minimum cutoff score, and it should be reflective of the role, in acknowledgement that you're going to need to execute other tasks following on from that. So VO2 and VO2 max, two different things. Often the bleep test is done to VO2 max.
Yes.
So, for instance, you're going to do it to exhaustion, or whether that be volitional, which is your candidate's choice to get off, or whether the tester stops it because you've reached the criteria. Often it's maximum heart rate. It could be taken lactate. There's a number of parameters which testers will look for in order to achieve VO2 max. And usually it's 2 or 3 that you're looking for. Once you've reached those, you're satisfied. Often it's a plateau, a steady state, which is part of the reason why when we're testing people, we're looking to sort of get near to double figures. So the 10, 11 minute mark, because otherwise your heart rate will increase too quickly and you will cease exercises simply because you're too exhausted. So you need to move people through the various levels in order to be able to demonstrate they've achieved a VO2 max, if that makes sense.
Okay. Yeah, you've got to make it progressive.
You can get to a maximum heart rate. You can get to a maximum heart rate without getting to VO2 max if you get there too quickly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Someone's startled by something, adrenaline, cortisol dumps.
Exactly.
My partner comes in wearing something really nice in the evenings. Maximum heart rate might be achieved very quickly, but
there you go.
Hopefully there's a little bit more in the tank still for everyone's enjoyment.
That's our fight or flight. Yeah. I
think we'll be using that test. When we say expectations of the job, what did we think was the most demanding part of the job? Because I'm guessing we had to plan it for worst case scenario or most probable case scenario. But also, now, I'm going to say worst case scenario because, what's expected of a person, what's in the role map, evidential experience from debriefs in the past of where there's been firefighter fatalities, and was it a reasonable expectation? Because I don't think we're ever going to write down on a debrief report they didn't save the casualty because the firefighter wasn't fit enough, because they were on the run, because they passed the national standard. But when is enough enough? Because, I'm going to the National Beer Challenge again soon, and there were people there arguably doing more than is necessary, more than they would be expected to do within their role map, because they're in a competition. Or you go to the Firefighter Challenge competitions and we go, hey, greatest, fittest firefighter there. What were we factoring in as the most difficult part? Because we spoke about hose roll, we spoke about lifting a ladder and all that sort of jazz. Was there anything done around breathing apparatus?
Yeah, so there were various. So we had an expert panel. I mean, if you do ever have more questions regarding specifically the actual fitness standard side, certainly Dr. Rich Stevenson will be one to give you sort of more granular detail on that. But we worked together. We often presented each other's data at the time, and we worked closely. So I'm sure he'd be happy for me to discuss that. So we put together an expert panel of firefighter practitioners. They may or may not have been in the training department, but they've certainly 15 years plus of experience. If I remember rightly, I think there were about 15 people. We got them together in a room, and we asked them, what are the core skills you expect firefighters to have? What equipment does that involve? And what are the tasks that you would reasonably expect them to achieve, operational tasks? And we came up with a series of job tasks. The next question was, what kind of speed, and what would be the duration, what would be the health and safety considerations? There were a whole series of questions we went through. Following on from that, we then went away and we videoed a lot of these tasks, and we videoed them at different speeds, because it was very difficult for someone to say to us, right, okay, well, we want this to be done at 8 kilometers per hour. Well, what's 8 kilometers per hour? But often the expert, they wouldn't know what it looks like.
No.
So they know what a firefighter, what would you reasonably, if you looked at a fire ground, what would you expect to see? What would be reasonable?
Yeah.
So we went away and have filled 3 different speeds. So various tasks at 3 different speeds, and asked them to vote based on what they saw. And they chose the appropriate speeds, what they thought was reasonable expectations at an operational incident. So I can say that breathing apparatus and executing a rescue in combination with hose running was certainly the most arduous task from a cardiorespiratory, and you could probably argue muscular endurance as well. They certainly seem to be elicit the higher values when we were measuring the cardiorespiratory responses.
But were they done? And I know I'm asking some very granular questions there. I apologize. Yeah. Feel free to say that. Just don't have
granular is good.
Granular. Okay. You ask an instructor what's expected of a candidate. They go on a BA reaccreditation, and some people do play the game. They do everything safely and make it into the second compartment, and then come back.
Yeah.
And didn't achieve a rescue, but they were safe. And they've passed their annual fitness test. And begrudgingly, you have to pass them. But you're like, I would have thought it would be realistic to expect you to achieve more than that. But if I said to you, well, what's the standard? Well, okay, well, every building's different and every casualty is slightly different, but not in training schools. Most of the fire training units across the UK. And some do have a set standard. They'll say, put a casualty at the top of the stairs, blah, blah, blah. If you don't bring them out, it's a fail, because that's a reasonable expectation that you should be able to get that far based on fitness tests and the air that we've provided you with and all that jazz. Do you think we should have a standard expectation of what people should achieve in a breathing apparatus? That's such a horrible question. Sorry, feel free to do whatever you want with it.
No, I think it's a good question, and it's a question that should be asked and repeatedly asked based on changes in a number of different things. Not least how we live, where we live. Yeah. So
the weight of the national population.
I mean, that's certainly something we can touch on. Yeah. So.
Yeah. It is beyond a privilege to be able to bring the Firefighters podcast to you, and we are so grateful for every single person that supports, listens, shares, and follows our journey. But here's the honest truth. It takes a colossal amount of time and work to keep the podcast going. And to help us keep doing it, create more, reach more guests internationally, and make the podcast sustainable, we're asking for you to help. And to do this, we've set up a Patreon page. Now, by joining this, you'll not only support the future of the podcast, but also gain access to exclusive benefits. Now, if you've ever wanted to meet a member of the podcast, buy us a beer, buy us a coffee, and you think anything you've ever listened to on the podcast has been worth £3, that's basically what we're asking you for. By joining our Patreon community, you will get access to every single full episode archive we have ever made. Now, hundreds and hundreds of key documents that we've got in there on fire behavior, firefighter health, cancer risks, incident debriefs, and so much more. So if you feel like you want to join the Patreon crew and help us make this possible, head to patreon.com/TFFPC or check the link in any episode podcast notes.
We based the scenario on a pumping appliance being three hose lengths from water source, and penetration into the building 2 lengths, so 50 meters. Hence the dummy drag being 50 meters, so 2 times 25. Yeah. Right. So we had distances in mind on sort of reasonable expectations of a typical house, a typical position of a hydrant. I mean, this obviously varies if you're somewhere rural, and there's lots of.
You've got to stick your stake in the ground somewhere, haven't you?
But you've got to, and we thought that's reasonable. You know, I mean, even a job like that doesn't happen that often, but it's a reasonable expectation.
Yeah.
To be able
and
to.
You go,
execute
what if I'm
something.
10 lengths away? And you go, well, you probably have more resources.
Yeah,
and the question was then arriving straight away. You know, whatever.
The question was asked also. Well, you know, you're wearing breathing apparatus, so why would you be running the hose out? And the pushback was, well, sometimes we ride 4, and sometimes the second appliance can be a matter of minutes away. So you may need to get a feed in and have breathing apparatus on your back, not under air. Okay, breathing apparatus on your back, and then you may need to then drag a hose reel in once you're under air. So we bounced about these questions, and there were certain limitations. You know, if you were in a breathing apparatus set, we wouldn't expect you to run on a test, and this is the distinction. So people would say, well, you know, there are times I'm going to be running and I'm carrying stuff, and that's fine, but there are certain limitations when you have a test. Situation, there's a safety element to it.
Yeah, it's a controlled environment. We should be mitigating risk at all possible avenues.
Yeah. You're taking responsibilities for the safety.
It's hard to justify someone stacking it whilst they're holding the hydrant key and bar and messing it. And you go, for a test, why was the candidate running with that kit? But you know what? I think other than Merseyside, like a lot of places don't make their firefighters run anywhere at all anymore, and if they do, they're doing it in shorts, t-shirt, and trainers. Do you know if anywhere assesses firefighters running in kit?
Well, I can tell you that certainly the test requirements for the recommendations that we produced are very granular. They're granular in detail. Yeah, you have to wear firefighting kit. You have to wear your helmet. You have to wear your gloves. Because it's not a PPE issue in the test, although sometimes it is. It's because in order for the test to be valid and reliable, reproducible, then you have to reproduce the conditions test on retest. Otherwise, you're not doing the same test. So I can say, firefighting kit, well, there's a breathing apparatus, they set on average, what we're talking sort of 15 kilograms. Yep. It depends on sets. Sets are getting lighter all the time. Kit, 10 kilograms or so, the full kit.
Yep.
Now, that's a lot of weight. If you start to take things off, jacket or whatever, it's not only about the thermoregulation elements of the test, it's also you're not carrying the same amount of weight.
I always use those roundabout figures. I always say about 24 kilos, which for people's maths is 4 stone, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's like another 4 stone of stuff that you've got on you, basically. Like wearing a sleeping bag with 4 stone. Do you know what I mean? That's kind of what you're trying to relate it to. So when
it does feel like a sleeping bag at times.
Oh, it does. But again, kit is developing and changing, breathability, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, you've got to factor in for those worst case scenarios. What amount of international comparison was, because this, you said the origins of this came from some observations or intelligence or information that was sought from internationals. If I look at the CPAT test as an example,
Yeah.
um, what's wrong with that? Why wouldn't we just do that? I
So,
know I'm getting into horrible solution mode, but I'd be forgiven if I, well, I wouldn't be forgiven if I didn't sort of raise it and go, theirs seems harder.
so it's not that it's wrong. I mean, no test is either really completely wrong or completely
Yeah.
right necessarily. But
For people who don't
it's
know, sorry,
it's
CPAT is what they do in America and Canada and various other
yeah,
places.
yeah. So it's about
Candidate physical ability test or whatever it is. Sorry.
it's about although the tests are similar, the tests have to reflect the job
Okay.
that you do. So, yes, we've got, I mean, they call it a yeah, what do they call a breaking in tool? There is a difference in terminology.
So
Um,
Halligan was the guy that invented it. He was an American firefighter. They just call him a set of irons or something like that usually.
yeah,
Forcible
okay.
entry, breaking in gear, but people know what we mean.
So
The
there
hoolie
are
bar.
there are differences with the kit, and there are differences in the way they use the kit. So, one, you've got differences in the actual equipment, and then you've got differences in procedures. So, we have to evidence that the questions have been asked. You have to have a job. So if you had a test without a task analysis on your population, you're vulnerable. You're vulnerable
Mhm.
to that test being challenged and somebody in court saying, "Hang on a minute. So can you just explain to me who asked the questions, who answered the questions, and what information fed into the creation of the test?"
Mhm.
And if you cannot demonstrate due diligence in that, then no matter how good you think the test is, it's vulnerable. So,
Mhm.
anybody will be able to say, well, okay, that's an American firefighter. So do you wear the same do you wear the same PPE? Well, not really. Okay, so you don't. Right. Okay, so do you use the same equipment? Well, yeah. Well, we do in so. Oh, right. So that's a no as well. Okay,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
how does your population compare? Well, we're similar. You see, it's a different population as well. Okay, so what you're telling me is there's nothing actually the same, but you're using that. Right? Yes, that's okay. So it
And I
becomes,
appreciate the fireground fitness test is a very good test. And it is,
yeah,
and we'll go into what it is and how it got created in a
yeah,
minute. I just, and again, I know as is timed, but I don't know, maybe I'm just being too romantic about the bloody Americans again, but it's like 8 separate stations, timed elements to it. Um, they have stairs, they have a stair climb as part of theirs that kicks them off, which I do think's
yeah,
a lot more arduous than just going up and down a jog on. But again, only for unique situations where there's, well, not only usually, but likely only when there's high rise and all that sort of jazz. Um, but yeah, I mean, they obviously do the ceiling breaching and pulling, which we don't. I mean, we do it in the overhaul and the checking for hotspots and
mm,
stuff, but we don't typically go around breaching ceilings as a first form of attack. But
yeah,
what was that looked at?
yeah. I mean, breaking in was something that we did look at, but it was there is a balance to be struck between you know, reproducing key elements of the job and also having a test which actually can be rolled out in the majority of stations.
Hmm.
And so, you've got to be able to come up with a test which is both reflective of the job and can be executed with minimum equipment at most stations. And so, you then ask the question, well, yeah, the CPAT is a good test, but how often is it used at each station? Does each station
They go
have
to
the
central
facility?
locations for testing usually.
Do they go
don't
to and if they go to central locations, then how often do they do that? Is it really accessible for everybody?
Yeah, it's a big
And
logistical
so,
lift, especially if you tried to make
yeah,
Scotland do it or something like that. You're like, oh bloody hell! We've got people have to take
Scotland's
a
a good
boat ride in
example.
7 hours for them to get to the training facility to carry out this test. You know
Very
what I mean?
much
It's a
so.
logistical nightmare.
And Scotland actually, with James Bilson and Rich Stevens at the University of Bath, they actually were commissioned by the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service to come up with a shortened version of the firefighter drill ground assessment to reflect the smaller areas that they've got in some of the more rural fire stations, so that they can still do a test which is valid and reproducible, but is also they're able to do it in the facilities and the equipment that they've got up there. Now that test is still valid and reliable, and it still can be mapped to surrogate tests on the treadmill and elsewhere. So there are alternatives, but then you still need to follow the scientific principles to underpin these tests. As soon as you start to change a test because it's different, and you think, well, I don't need to wear gloves, or why do I wear a jacket? It's the middle of summer, and we're just doing a test. That's when it starts to lose its validity and reliability. So, as long as you go through and revisit these tests, and it's important that you do that because equipment changes, operating procedures change, and you need to revisit the tests. As long as you can do that, and you're transparent, then the tests should reflect the job. So, yeah, we've gone off. I forgot. Was there a question?
No, mate, it's never a question, really. You do well to get a question out of me. There's usually 12 will hit you all at once in a scattergun approach, and we'll manage one or two of them. How much was age and body weight and size factored into this? And what I mean by that is, was there any factoring in for, as time passes, you'll get older, funnily enough, and that will have with it more difficult factors in trying to achieve the same level of fitness as anybody in their 40s and beyond will be able to attest to. Was there any consideration to factor that in so that we set you up for success? I.e., if you're 20, you need to achieve this. But if you're 35, you only need to achieve that. And people would say, well, that's not fair. That's ageist. And you go, no, it's supported by data, because whilst you might be like this now, population statistics suggest that you will likely decline in your fitness over the next 15 years. So actually, if you're starting at that, unlikely you're going to be able to maintain it, because otherwise we end up with, there's a lot of them out there, people in their 40s, late 40s, 50s, are expecting firefighters to work into their 60s now.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure we did them justice in maybe, and I'm not saying you, me, Firefighter, anybody, just we, the collective we that we use to tarnish all the blame with. Did we put them in the loop about the information that was available to us and said, well, you know what, you're gonna have to work a lot harder than that, Jim, to keep your hand in until you're 60, otherwise you might be out of the job unless you're planning on getting an admin role or whatever. And he said, wind your neck in, Phil, passed the test, didn't I? Now leave me alone. I'm going to put in a grievance. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Gore-Tex Professional Fabrics. Now, we all know the working environment of a firefighter is filled with challenges. We face serious risks on the job, such as heat exhaustion, burns, physical and mental stress, and we frequently come into contact with high levels of toxic chemicals. Now, I have been wearing Gore-Tex for nearly 2 decades on the front line, working in hostile environments, tackling challenging incidents from firefighting to water incidents and in urban search and rescue environments. Gore-Tex have a well-earned reputation for protecting professionals in the fire and emergency services through their family of highly innovative, waterproof, breathable moisture barriers that exceeds global performance standards and are trusted worldwide. Gore-Tex, going further together.
And you've touched on a few things there. So whilst we were involved in the research, there was the pension age dispute.
Mm.
And so we were very mindful that we needed volunteers for the research, which we completed at Fire Service College at the time. And we needed volunteers from a representative sample of the entire UK fire service. We didn't just
not
want
just
people
the people
from
that do the challenges. Oh yeah, I'll come and do it. What? I'll go for a jolly down the college and just run around. Yeah, I'll do that. Is lunch included?
Yeah.
I mean, not a representative.
It was actually, and an overnight stay, but yeah.
Back in the day, brother.
we weren't short of volunteers, but it is always tricky, and you touch on a point there. In any research, it is always tricky to get a sort of a nice spread of participants from all,
Well, if you go to whatever fitness advisor and say, give us your worst performer who just scraped through, and they go, oh, bloody hell, I can't put that on the paperwork. But I'll tell you what, Pete Wakefield, he's hanging out of his arse every time he does it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'll send him down and try and tell him he gets some sort of CPD for it. But yeah, it must be very difficult
tricky
to get, because people don't want to come and embarrass themselves either.
People don't want to come and embarrass themselves, and equally, in a sort of backdrop of questions being asked about the ability for firefighters to stay healthy and work longer. There were lots of understandable questions being asked about the research we were doing. Because on the face of it, firefighters were quite understandably suspicious in so much that, hang on a minute, if they know, they being, we got lumped with the they, if they know, what potentially we could fail at, and they put a fitness standard in, does that mean that we're going to fail and we're going to, is it?
You're going to put me out of the job because I can't. You just changed the goalposts. The government just changed the goalposts. I signed up for something to do 25, 30 years. I thought, that's achievable. And you just changed the goalpost. You just did a quick switch.
Yeah. So what we did is we engaged very much with the union. Many meetings. They came to the Firefighter conference. We had presentations. We went also, every single fire station that was involved in giving us participants, we went and we presented the project to them, and cakes. We started with cakes. That was part of the introduction, and then
just to confuse them.
And they've got to be cream cakes as well. None of this, don't come without cream cakes. So because I was operational, I'm a union member. I'd seen a lot at that point. I'd had long enough in the job to understand a lot of the questions, and so I felt as though I could answer them reasonably well, and I was accepted in that respect. So although we did lose participants in through the dispute, we managed to keep enough to.
They didn't die, did they?
No.
How hard was the test? What are you doing?
Some people decided not to come, and they were worried about the implications of the research,
the ramifications, and being under the spotlight.
The ramifications.
And needs to take a close look. Yeah,
that was okay. So understandably, it was a difficult time, and we managed to keep it on track. And I often wonder whether, if we hadn't been fire service employees, if we were a corporate organization who was doing the research, I don't think they would have been able to survive with that. So we were fortunate that we had feet on the ground and people knew us. Rich Stevenson was the fitness advisor in South Wales Fire and Rescue. I was an operational firefighter in Lancashire. People knew me. I knew officials.
Yeah,
it helped. It really helped. Yeah. So to come back to your discussion about, the reason I touched on that was because, age was very much wrapped up in pensions, understandably so. And so what we said was, well, if we want to have a discussion about what's sort of realistic and safe, and I think this discussion is still ongoing, really.
Well, it is, especially with the women's factor now. Not that women are special, but they are different, and menopause,
you need to understand.
Blah, 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 blah. It's a whole different thing.
really do need to understand, what is firefighting, and how do those physical demands manifest operationally? What fitness standard is appropriate to that, and how does that change through a career, and how can
Hmm.
you support people to both achieve and maintain that fitness standard? And if we hadn't done the research, we wouldn't have had as much understanding as we do now. And so, although there are lots of things that need to be maybe looked at and improved on, and I can say this confidently, and we've been to conferences abroad. We've been looked at now from Canada, Australia, the Netherlands, and they've looked at how we've done our research, how we've executed the fitness standards, and that they've taken quite a lot from what we've done so far, and our discussions have equally influenced some of the decisions that have been made abroad, and it's reflected in people who come to our Firefit conference year on year. We regularly have people from the USA. We had somebody from Greece, the Netherlands.
Not invited me yet. Awkward. To be fair, you have, but
Must have got lost in the post. No.
yeah, another one of them.
So
Because I keep talking fitness rubbish on the podcast, I don't know what I'm on about.
it's truly an international sort of collaboration now, and I think that's really important. Although you need to have a bespoke standard, there are lessons to be learned from understanding the approaches, not just abroad, but also amongst other emergency services in the UK, other professions in the UK. And sometimes we do get delegates coming from the military, from the police, from the ambulance service. So
don't you think the police should have to do a bit of a harder fitness test?
There's a question.
There's a big provocative political question. I think we're setting them up for failure. I think that's really cruel to a lot of the police officers. Because I'm going to stop there, and I'd love to, before I flood you with my own biases, but I think when you get really fit police officers, sometimes it's by accident, not by design, simply because of their own high personal standards, if they are one of those types of individuals.
Yeah, I think there's lots of benefits to a fitness standard. I think there's a distinction between a standard for health and a standard for operational preparedness. Yeah. So I think, there's definitely an argument for, encouraging somebody to be fitter so that they can be healthier in the workplace. You're going to have more present employees. You can tolerate shift patterns. You're less likely to suffer the effects of disease, and you're more likely to have better psychological well-being. So there's lots of benefits besides operational preparedness. But when you're talking about having a standard where, you potentially could take somebody off operational duties, that has to tick certain boxes in order for it to be defendable. And so,
yeah, but I think about grappling and trying to restrain a human being, which is a reasonable expectation for a police officer.
Yeah,
we don't have to do that. It's not expected that I will wrestle with a member of the public as part of my role. It is part of their job.
Yeah,
and anyone that's ever done any kind of jiu-jitsu or wrestling, it is the most exhausting exercise I think I've ever done, because it's you versus another human being, and there is zero rest for like at least 40 seconds until one of you, submits position of some capacity. But they don't have to, I don't know what, they just do a bleep test, don't they?
So, I mean, I don't know. I do know that.
I know it's not your area of expertise.
Professor Kevin Sykes, interestingly, actually came and presented at our Firefight conference. I'd have to check now. It might be 4 years ago. He was asked by the police. I forget is it Chiefs Council? Police Chiefs Council? I forget the actual.
Who knows?
So he was asked by the hierarchy
overlords
of the
police
service. Yeah, to come up with the rationale for the VO2 standards. And so they have a different approach where, because of the variety of roles in the police service. So they have, I think it's the tactical firearms have the highest VO2 standard, and I
Yeah, the
think it
tactical
works.
firearms and the people that are on the riot teams, they have to hold a shield for a certain amount of time and they have to do some additional testing. Similar
Yeah,
to paramedics, if you're on the heart team, you have to
yeah.
pass an additional fitness test. But even just a general police officer, I feel like it should be higher. But anyway,
Yeah, so I mean, there's a good rationale for that, isn't there? But I
I
think
dragged it down a rabbit hole. My fault. Sorry.
it
Um,
can be a bit tricky. But I
I
think
wanted to come back to fat, emotive topic. Absolute aerobic capacity and factored in with fat mass is a useful indicator
yeah,
for fitter, leaner, faster, safer firefighters.
yeah,
Fat's a very emotional topic.
yeah,
You can be fit fat because there's a lot of people out there, a lot of rugby players are fit fat. I'm going to leave that one on the table and go, we don't measure, we measure BMI, which is a horrific metric. I don't think, do you think we should use BMI for anything?
Well, at a population level, it's useful. So, a BMI is a real good example of where you've got a variable there where at the population level, you can see the evidence. The higher the BMI, certainly over as you get into sort of 35 and 40 BMI, there's a clear correlation with disease. It becomes less clear when you then take it at the individual level. So, um, when you've overweight was at 25, obese 30, and then it becomes morbidly obese, and there's different categories, classifications
I
thereafter.
think I've just gone back under morbidly obese. I think I'm only obese at the minute as on the
yeah.
BMI scale, which is massive because I used to be morbidly obese for ages, but I've never been unfit. Do you know what I mean? That's why I think it's a rubbish metric for firefighters.
It's an indication of weight, not an indication of excess.
Of body mass, body mass index.
So it gives you nothing with regards to the individual and where the fat sits and where the excess body fat sits, which is something that you need if you truly want to understand the effects on health. Now, although if you're being honest, then a lot of the conversations we have and pushback from BMI, those individuals more often than not would benefit from losing weight.
I'm losing weight at the minute because even though I'm fit, it's a lot of mass for my body to carry. And I've had issues with circulation in the past. I used to be massive, used to be like 24 stone. And it's for me long term, for my skeleton, for my heart, it's not great. I need to keep trimming it off, really.
Where it's not helpful is, you sit down and somebody says, well, you've got a BMI of 30 there. Okay. Right. Okay. I want you to do X, Y, and Z. That's not particularly helpful. But if you sat that individual down and said, oh, that's a bit, okay, the BMI is 30 there. Right. Okay. Let's have a look at your waist. Right. Okay. That's over. So, okay. So let's have a look at your waist hip ratio. Right. Okay. Let's have a look at your blood pressure. Okay. That's high. Okay.
Do fitness advisors take a waist hip ratio?
Some do, some don't.
Really?
I know they do in Merseyside. I know they did do in Lancashire. I can't say how
I've
many.
never been in that bucket,
do.
so I don't see they probably wouldn't be interested. But there's some people might be a little bit sensitive about that.
Yeah. So, you're starting then to understand a bit more about where the weight is sitting. So when you understand waist and when you look at waist, and also there's also a nice one, a waist height ratio, which I quite like.
Okay.
So then you're starting to see, you bring it into play, actually, it's the abdominal obesity, which we really should be more interested in not necessarily BMI. It's where is that excess body weight
because
sitting?
abdominal size can't really be explained by muscularity.
So
Because we're
then you
saying most
start,
people will
yeah,
carry muscle around their quads, their shoulders, the bigger muscle groups, your glutes, but you
yeah,
shouldn't be having a lot on your belly, really.
yeah, yeah. Then you start to and particularly in combination with blood pressure, which I think is really sort of, I wouldn't say it's overlooked, but I think there's an opportunity to be better at how we communicate the importance of healthy blood pressure,
Mm-hmm.
particularly in firefighters, because there's a reason why it's called a silent killer,
Yeah.
because you don't feel unwell per se, but the damage that it's doing to your vascular system, and the risk that it carries in sort of your day to day workplace, is is unsurpassed compared to other characteristics.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing I would refer you to would be if you look at the World Health Organization's the highest deaths per risk factor, so not per disease, but per
Mm-hmm.
risk factor. I think I looked at it the other day. So just as an example, let's see what I've got that to
I can pull
hand.
it up. I'll put a marker on here for us
Uh,
to.
yeah, so 2021 World Health Organization, high blood pressure just under 11 million. Air pollution, interestingly, was second at just over 8 million. And
Inside your sphere of
smoking,
control versus outside your sphere of control, yeah.
smoking, 6 million. Now we know smoking, but high blood pressure, uncontrolled high blood pressure, so understanding your blood pressure. And I would really sort of recommend that people buy the blood pressure monitors, and
Yeah.
actually it's like getting on scales. You understand your trends and your blood pressure, but if your blood pressure spikes and it continues to spike, that's having a really damaging effect and the increase in risk. So there was a really interesting study, it's almost like a landmark study done by Kales a number of years ago, and a lot of the conversations that came about on cardiac risk, stroke risk amongst firefighters was as a result of the Kales study.
Okay.
And they demonstrated that um, although in absolute terms, there's not a great deal of numbers of firefighters dying of a heart attack, the relative risk of a heart attack during operational duties was considerable. And it was
Mm.
during specific times of day, and not only specific times of day, it was amongst a specific characteristic, an individual with certain characteristics. And high blood pressure was by far the biggest increase in risk for those cardiac deaths.
Mm.
So yes, I mean cardiac deaths are or certainly were the biggest killer amongst firefighters operationally. High blood pressure is the characteristic which underpin those deaths. And so, I think communicating the importance of having healthy blood pressure to shift workers generally, but specifically to firefighters, I think is really, really important, particularly as you get older.
But a lot of roads lead back to so many of these lifestyle elements, which again then becomes to feel like a personal attack. If we look at people trying to actively lower their blood pressure as an example, it does fall into regular physical activity, maintaining a healthy weight, eating a diet that's low in salt, lots of vegetables, limit your alcohol, don't smoke. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But stress is a big factor as well. Stress, sleep,
Yeah.
cortisol. Do you know what I mean? Those are big factors to try and have a meaningful impact on your blood pressure.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things there, and often we talk about them in isolation, but they're very rarely in isolation. They if you've had a good night's sleep, for instance, you're more likely to be able to exercise. You're more likely to eat healthily. You're more likely to have good conversations with people at home. I'll come back to that because sleep is particularly interesting. But these conversations should be in with all these things in mind. So if you, as you rightly said, if you are talking about blood pressure, I don't like the personal, and I prefer to sort of talk about how to shape your life so that making the right decision is easier.
Reducing
I'd rather,
behavioral friction. That's what I
yeah,
always talk about.
I'd rather sort of shape the conversation like that. I think as soon as you say it's your responsibility to do X, Y, and Z, I think that takes you into a sort of this is me, this is you. I think it's far
Yeah.
better to recognize the barriers that people face and lower the barriers so that the decision becomes easier to make. An easy one would be, for instance, if you put your trainers next to your bed, you're more likely to get up and put your trainers on in the morning and go for a run than if you've got to go into another room. So,
Yeah.
so I think there are real, and
I have an
they're often,
alarm for bed.
yeah.
Tells me when to go to bed. MSA are supporting us on today's podcast, and I chose to partner with them because I've been wearing this stuff for nearly 20 years, and they are the global leader in development, manufacture, and supply of incredible, safe products that really protect people, not just our communities out there, but also first responders, most importantly, all over the world. Get yourself over to MSA and have a look at it. The high-performance protective clothing for emergency services responders. They also partner with us on the UK Pink Firefighters. It's because we love them. The helmets with the reflective visor, the F1XF, absolutely epic helmet. And not forgetting how they improve firefighter safety through their connectivity in the connected firefighter platform. MSA are always pushing the envelope, and it's a real privilege to be able to continue to grow our partnership together. So whether it's your PPE, your bunker gear, your helmets, your SCBA, your thermal imaging, your Luna, or your portable gas detection, both of us know that this equipment needs to work. It needs to be high quality, reliable, and dependable in the moment. And that's why I use MSA, because they know what's at stake. Because I know I'm going to need 40 minutes. I switch on different lights in the house. They're not blue lights. I don't put any special glasses on. I'm not one of them blokes. Not that there's anything wrong with that. It might arguably be better. But yeah, switch off the main big lights. We have small lamps around the house. Phone goes into another room. We may still watch a little bit of telly to connect with my daughter and my partner. But because I used to be terrible at it, and it's even worse for shift working, because it is very hard to get into that. I think the long-term studies on shift work and the carcinogenic elements to what that does to you, the all-cause mortality connections with shift work, I think is something we never really want to confront because we live in a 24-hour society now, and the emergency services has arguably always been a 24-hour sector. And it's I do want to ask you about sleep, but we'll probably stick a pin in that for a minute before I drag you off down another rabbit hole. So where did we get to with age? Is there an age that is not reasonable to expect people to be able to achieve these standards? And if someone at the age of 21 is just scraping through, should we be raising the bar for them?
Yeah, I'm glad you said that because that's an interesting one. When you say age, we automatically assume how old is too old, but actually age equally should reflect conversations you have with someone who is joining the job and is young. Because the short answer is no, you can't have a higher standard for someone when they're younger. But yes, you can have a conversation. Well, because a fitness standard reflects the job, and unless they're doing a different job, then that fitness standard should be set at. Now, there is a conversation to be had that, look, if you don't have a fitness reserve and a buffer in, then you are going to struggle. And, that's when you have robust procedures in place in order to support and prevent. I think the main thing is preventing the decline and the inevitable avoidance of tests that will happen if you don't have procedures in place. So, you've got ideally 6 monthly tests, and ideally you have good communication with employees on station. So you don't just turn up unannounced. They understand the reasons for doing the tests. They understand why you're taking your blood pressure. They understand what their blood pressure is. They understand where the tests come from. And that doesn't happen by chance. A fitness standard is a difficult thing to enforce, if that's the word to use. So you
Hmm.
need to have good relations with operational staff, and they don't just happen overnight. You go to the fire station, you have the
Hmm.
conversations. People understand why you've got a fitness standard. They understand where the difficulties will be as you get older. It's not only about your fitness decreasing, it's about injuries becoming more apparent that you've picked up when you're younger. And I
Yeah.
think that's important in the conversation that you have with people on duty to say, well, yeah, you are a competitive sports person now, you're lifting heavy weights. What we've got to consider is as you get older, the injuries that you've maybe
I have
picked
two
up or
bulging
will,
discs in my back.
there you go. Yeah.
Because I did lots of crazy, unnecessary,
Yeah.
massively heavy squats and deadlifts. And
Yeah.
that wasn't the only reason. I'm sure I was doing a lot of that with some bad technique at times, but the body keeps the score either way. Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean? I always say there's no solutions, only trade-offs to most
Yeah.
things in life. Do you think we should ban smoking? Sorry, sharp left
I
turn.
I like well, I mean, we're touching on public health now, which is again is a real passion, and I think has massive overlaps with conversations in the fire service. I think the move in the age
Hmm.
with which that you so I
For people that are
banning is
unfamiliar, what's the
I
wider
think
conversation that's happening there?
I'd rather see it become more and more difficult
Mhm.
for people to smoke than to ban it. I think when you ban something, I think it sends out a signal which is then has repercussions in other ways. And I think
It's a
banning,
parental thing. Yeah.
yeah, and I think you've got to be very careful when you ban something. But I think the shift in how people consider smoking socially, I think health has been huge, and I think that plays out in the statistics. I think what's disappointing is the inequality that's occurring regarding smoking.
Say more.
Well, I mean, we're digressing from fire service, but
No. It's
in the
interesting.
fire service now, smoking rates are lower than they've ever been. I mean, it's unusual. You may see vaping, but I think smoking per se
It's been a remarkable
is
success, hasn't it? It's weird.
massively so. But in communities, you know, socioeconomics plays a huge part. So
Mm.
in communities which are where deprivation is certainly prevalent, you see far higher rates of smoking, and
Which is crazy.
I think that's an absolute tragedy.
Yeah.
I really do, and the knock on effect of that for health generally, and also the consequences for society as a whole, I think is pretty profound, and that's really worrying.
That's the
So I'd like
Matthew
to see a lot
principle,
more. What's that?
The Matthew principle. So the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. And it's the same with health. The sick get sicker, the healthy get healthier, because it becomes such a heavy cognitive lift for you to rip yourself off the landing strip of your low socioeconomic level. Your access to people, access to information, access to encouragement,
Yeah,
mentorship. Someone said to me the other day, they were like, if you can't see a role model across the dinner table, you're already at a remarkable disadvantage in society. And I think that's probably true.
yeah,
Do you know what I mean? If everyone in you go to we'll have both been to streets in the services organizations that we work for. Same families have lived there for 90 years, longer.
yeah,
And if nothing changes, nothing changes. Do you know what I mean? And you're just like, we are failing these people. And people go, oh no, they're stupid. They don't work hard. They're poor behavior, blah, 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 low values. And you're like, they're people. They're
mm,
part of our society and
yeah,
we are failing them. You paint whatever you want over the top of it. We are failing them, in my personal opinion. And I don't know how that's going to get any better because as equally as we're living longer, health challenges, food deserts, education on cooking and general health and well-being. I'm like, these people are just going to struggle. They are really going to struggle.
yeah,
And we care. We put it on things. We say it in Parliament. We write it on a wall. We don't seem to be. I'm not not a remote expert in any capacity, but certainly not in socioeconomics and social, poor demographics and the sort of challenges that those people are facing. But it's hard to see. You'll have seen it many times going out on jobs, and you just think,
Yeah.
what's the expectation for this family? What's the expectation of this person? You know what I mean? No chance.
Yeah.
And we just write them off. We just write
Yeah.
human beings off, I think. That's what I think.
I think, and I think that's where, people talk about the personal responsibility. And I think one thing that I've realized, particularly becoming a parent, is just how tough certain things are when you've got young children and you're in a supermarket and, there's pressure on you.
Yeah.
And you're sleep deprived and, you're just trying to sort
Just
of
want to
get
pacify
in
them.
and and I was guilty of that. It's easy to judge what people buy, and the conversations they have. And I think becoming a parent has made me far more empathic, not just in that context, but I think also in health more broadly. And I've stepped back from thinking people making deliberate decisions to make themselves unhealthy, because nobody chooses to be unhealthy.
No,
Nobody
definitely
makes
not.
that conscious decision, but there are paths that people say, well, they've gone on that path. They've chose to go down that route. And I have
But
this
they're also
conversation
vulnerable.
often.
The way the food is designed, the way it tastes, the way it looks, the colors, how cheap it is.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Marketing companies, we're getting way down a rabbit hole here, but they just take advantage of people in those areas, I think, because that's, it's disgusting. But I don't see it changing.
I think they echo what's going to sell, and they take advantage of people who are more likely to buy those kinds of products, or more likely to be able to not be able to buy healthy products. And yes, you can say it's an education, or you can say it's you can say it's not only about money, but it's very difficult to separate these things out.
It is. You keep hiking the price of cigarettes, people won't buy them because they won't be able to afford to. You make them £50 a pack.
Yeah,
you have one a month, if that. If you're really, really up for it. Do you think we should increase the price of alcohol? We'll get off these rabbit holes in a second, I promise you and the listener. Although I think it's fascinating.
I think alcohol pricing is really important. And I think there's arguments for, we're talking about the drink, or we're talking about the strength, and I think there's definitely a good argument which plays out in the statistics that it does work, as does, pricing of sugary drinks. There's good evidence in South America where they introduced a sugar tax, and I think it has its place. But it has its place amongst a number of different considerations. It's not the panacea, and it's important that it's coupled with things like advertising. It's coupled with, what you allow on the high street. It's coupled with education. It's coupled
where you
with
position
schooling.
It in the store. If you ban advertisements of certain products,
the built environment generally. The safe streets. The road networks, public transport, all these things. It's a complex network of factors which take people down a more likely route of a certain behavior. And so I think, it is part of the solution, but it's not the solution. But I think it's a big part of it. I think food environment generally, I think is needs a lot of work doing. I think there's been some great documents recently. But the appetite, if I can use that word, that's a bad joke, isn't it? The appetite to actually roll these things out, the political will, I think, is.
We don't want to scare away all the millionaires, and that's not me being horrible against the rich. But what I mean is, you make it difficult for business owners to make a profit, which they're well entitled to do, and they should do because they work really bloody hard. But if they're their company or their brand, their whatever, just happens to sell vodka, you know what I mean? Then you just drive them away. They'll go somewhere else. They'll take the business somewhere else, and that hurts the economy and blah, 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 blah. But I think alcohol, I get triggered by it. I've lost a couple of close friends who struggle with alcoholism. I think it's got a lot to answer for. Sugar's got a lot to answer for. Alcohol's got a lot to answer for as this social drug that we all just go, hey, alcohol is fine. No weed. Don't have weed or mushrooms or anything else. But alcohol, you knock it back, son. Every social engagement we go to.
Yeah, there's a lot of harm there. There's a lot of harm.
I think domestic violence, personal health, the NHS and the social system catches all of that done by alcohol and the abuse of a remarkably dangerous drug. Anyway, let's change gears. Hard gear change back in. Have we lowered the standard for firefighter fitness?
If anything, I think we're in a far better place than we were a number of years ago. And the reason I say that is it's about understanding what the standard is and what the standard is based on. Now, there's lots of things which have changed recently in the fire service and will continue to do so. I mean, a dizzying amount of equipment and procedural changes since I joined. Mm-hmm. So, and a lot of those things had to change and will continue to do so. But what's important is that we understand that, being fit enough to be a firefighter is not a bit about being an athlete. It's about recognizing what you need the attributes that you need for the job and how best to maintain that through your career. And so whatever that is, and whatever tests you have, they should reflect the job. Now, it's important that you support people to do that. So it's not a test that you put on someone. It's a test that you take someone with, so it's not suddenly just say, right, okay, it's pass or fail. Before anybody actually conducts a test, they should be well versed in what the test is. Mm-hmm. They should be well versed in where their own fitness standard is. I mean, the treadmill test is a good example. The treadmill test can be conducted by anyone on any treadmill generally anywhere. Yes, it's got to be calibrated. Yes, there are checks and balances that need to be in place, but mostly people are fully aware of, a fairly reasonable, simple test. You can demonstrate that you've got 42 or above.
Isn't it a bit too remarkably vague, though? Because it's based on collective data sets, because you're not taking a blood sample before and after, and you're also not hooking me up to a machine. I'm just walking.
Yeah, so
13 minutes or whatever it is.
I mean, again, a standard and an occupational fitness standard is about what can you do with the time, the equipment, the facilities that you've got in order to make sure people can be healthy. But if you need to signpost them somewhere else, whether that be to your occupational health physician or whether that be to the GP, then, you've got to make sure that those who are conducting the tests spot the red flags, spot the signs and symptoms where they may need to signpost them to someone else. Mm-hmm. So I think there's a limit in what you can achieve in the time and the equipment that you've got. But that's not to say that it should be seen as something which is watered down. It's an opportunity to engage and to make sure that you're doing the best you can in making sure that people achieve the standard which reflects their role.
Why don't we mandate that they do the fireground fitness test?
So that is an option. It's certainly an option in Merseyside. Some stations choose it. I know in Merseyside, the current system is that you have to give the fitness advisor warning so that they bring the appropriate equipment and then they set it up in the yard and they run the test. But that is an option in the suite of tests which are offered. I can't say that's reflective of every fire rescue service. I know some, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was Devon and Somerset, I think they were actually using the drill ground assessment as the main test.
Good.
But I don't think that's necessarily typical. I think most at best are aware of the drill ground assessment. Some offer it as an option, and a few
When you say bring the appropriate
have it as
stuff,
their main test.
it's all on the
Yeah.
truck. What else do I need?
Yeah. So
That's the whole point of it, isn't it?
yeah. So I mean,
give them forewarning. What? That I've got a
dependent.
fire engine. Yeah, I've got a fire
Yeah,
engine. I'm on a fire
depending on
station.
depending on the arrangements you have in place, getting the kit off the truck and setting it all up, and then necessarily having put it back. There may be operational considerations to that. Also, the nature of the tests. So you're expecting to carry hose. Um, you know, in order for it to be a clean test, should we say, you may want that hose to be nicely coiled up so it's tight. And so there is an argument for having your hose of appropriate size and standard on a bespoke vehicle. I mean,
sounds like a cop out.
Not so long
it's your
ago,
fire
actually,
station.
Not so long ago at the fire station I work at, actually, I was asked the same question. So we set it up in the yard and we actually ran it. And it was a really interesting thing for people to experience. Now, because I really, really understood the nature of the test, I could set it up so that everything was in the exact right position. It is quite difficult for on-station personnel to properly set it up and remember how many lengths they've run, how many repeats they've done.
Yeah.
You've got your test sheet, but if that's the first time you've looked at the test sheet and you're prompting someone, it's a big ask not to miss something out. So it does need to ideally be done by a fitness advisor, and then the fitness advisor, I think, is better prepared if they have a certain amount of kit with them, so that they know they've got the kit, it's there and ready. And as much as it sounds like a cop out, it's part of the ability to execute the test in due time and standardization and all those things. So you're right, and there's a good argument for saying, right, okay, practice carrying the hose. Yeah. You don't need to do the whole test. Break it down into chunks, practice the various chunks. And then, like any preparation for an event, you don't run a marathon to prepare for a marathon, do you?
No.
You run a series of tests.
You never run a full marathon until you do the marathon. If you're doing your training program properly.
Yeah, you'll have a long run of every week, and you'll do a series of runs, and you'll build up your mileage over a period of time. But you break it down to chunks. I mean, the drug analysis is no different. Break it down into chunks. If it's something you want to improve at, and then where your weaknesses are, and how you can make up the time and understand the test. So, yeah.
Why do we not use heavier casualties?
So, the casualty, the weight of the dummy that we use was based on the 90th percentile a single person carry. So the 90th, so it's, I'd have to check whether this is still the case now. It's 90, okay. I'm sure the 90th percentile has shifted since it was last. But the 90th percentile, so 90% of people in the population are this weight or under. Now, the 90th percentile was 110 kilograms.
Okay.
Don't know what it is now. I would probably think it's a little bit heavier, maybe. So the single person dummy drag is 55 kilograms.
Because the theory is you'll be doing it with a partner.
Now the argument is, well, what happens if your partner goes down and you've got to drag your partner out? What happens if you have two casualties? And they are good arguments. But we come back to what's reasonable to expect for a BA wearer. And so it is reasonable to expect that there will be two of you dragging a casualty out. And when we do our BA, competencies, we go in as a pair, as a three, typically as a pair. And if we're dragging a casualty out, that technique is factored in as a pair. So the argument is, if that's what you're going to train, let's sort of let's reproduce that in a test. And so 55 kilograms, half of 110, which is the 90th percentile of the population.
I want to take a minute to just tell you about something that I think you're going to be really interested in. Next September, firefighters from across the UK and Ireland will be travelling to Atlanta, Georgia for something truly special. It's the United for 9/11. It's the Memorial Stair Climb. Now, this isn't just any event, it's a once-in-a-generation tribute where 343 firefighters, one for every FDNY firefighter who gave their life on September 11th, will climb 110 floors in their honor. It's about more than just a physical challenge. It's about remembering sacrifice, pushing ourselves, and standing shoulder to shoulder across services and across nations. It's a chance to honor the legacy of 9/11, to pay tribute to our fallen firefighters, and to test your mental and physical strength, and to raise an awareness around mental health and resilience in the fire service. Whether you take part in this climb or not, support from home, or simply help spread the word, you can be part of it. This is about unity, remembrance, and respect. So if you want to learn more, head over to www.memorialstairclimb.co.uk or on Instagram, check out United_911 climb. This is going to be something powerful. I hope you can make it. I hope you can support it. Now back to the show. But not all of the people in the population are in the highest risk factor to get stuck in a fire, aren't they? So did we not factor in data like, of all of the people that have died in fires, what's the average weight of them? Because I'll bet they are the unhealthy, obese, frail, poor mobility. I wouldn't imagine, well, I know they're not fit people usually that get the higher percentile, because that's it. I personally feel like we've already got slightly off the path at the first calculation, because yes, we go factor for the entire general population, but they're not the ones going to get caught in fires. We already know who those people are.
Yeah.
They're the people that died or the people that we dragged out, and they're usually the big uns.
Yeah, I mean, we come back slightly more to the public health discussion again. So health inequity is at the heart of a lot of the incidents that emergency services attend. So if you can improve someone's health, you're less likely to have the fire service, the ambulance, the police knocking on your door. You're less likely to need those services. So, I think there's a good public health argument for all the emergency services to take improving health in the general population seriously in whatever way they can. And I do know that, I've had conversations recently with the head of public health in the Northwest Ambulance Service, and they are, and I'm sure they're not the only ones, who are increasingly looking at improving health in order to drive down demand for acute intervention. And so improving health is the responsibility of all of us, really.
Yeah, it is, but it's harder for us to influence that. What's easier for us to influence is to factor in that that's probably not going to work, or if it does, it's going to happen over a couple of generations.
Yeah.
We need to deal with the here and now, which is growing waistline of the UK population. But we don't seem to be factoring that in. And please call BS on me. Please say, Pete, you're absolutely wrong. We are factoring that, or go, oh, yeah, I'll take it to the next meeting. But I'm sure I'm not remotely intelligent. Like, I'm sure I'm not the first person to shine a light in this corner.
It is a question which is being asked regularly. I mean, bariatric patients, we are called to assist with. And so it is important that you do have, and I think this is where equipment and techniques and procedures become really, really important. You've got to really understand the nature of the incidents that we go to, and then the training and the equipment needs to reflect that. Sometimes these things can move so quickly that, it's difficult to, and climate change is a good example of that. It's difficult to keep pace with the changing nature of the incidents that we go to. So I think it's important that, it's important that we train and we consider these things in what we do and how we test for fitness standards. I think it's also important to recognize the limits of our own abilities, physical abilities,
Yeah.
and then step in with equipment and procedures to support that.
But it's deciding where that line sits. Yes, okay, 150 kilo person outside the realm of expectation of 2 firefighters. All the BA stuff that I've ever done is rarely ever one casualty. It's usually adult and baby, or it's at least 2 adults, and even the adults will only be at, if you can get away with putting a 70 in there, some people might let you. But thing is, you put a 70 in there and go, well, I sent 2 people in, and they go, well, that wasn't fair because you gave me the heavier casualty. Yeah, but there's 2 of you, and still people push back against that. So there's almost like it doesn't, when it hits reality, it doesn't work because we know that person is expected to do it by themselves because the other person is managing the hose reel, is leading them out, is doing all of the other stuff that we know that person is doing. But we go, oh no, it's 2-person lift. And I'm like, yeah, but it's not. It's 1 person. Do you know what I mean?
Often the technique is, I think, I can't speak for other people, but I find it often easier, to get under the arms and then to drag backwards. And my colleague would be pathfinding, and so
like 98%
from a technique point of view,
imagine.
and often that is the case. You are taking the casualty yourself, whilst your colleague is making sure that you're not going to trip over backwards. Because
don't get lost, don't fall down the stairs.
Yeah, exactly.
And we're telling people to do that. We're saying this person will lead you out, and we go, well, hang on a minute. I heard that podcast and they said that it's supposed to be 2 people. That's what the national data is based on. Yeah. So shouldn't be 3 of us.
Yeah.
I just can't. We're not going to come to an answer on that one. Whilst I agree with the rationale, I don't think that is the lived experience of the vast majority of the UK Fire and Rescue Service, of what's actually happening practically out there on the job.
Yeah.
My personal frustrations and thoughts. That's why I don't get invited to places. But
I can't believe that for a minute.
I know I do, but just the once. Swimming.
Yes.
Why don't we assess firefighters' ability to swim in a lot of places?
Yeah, well, interestingly, I was assessed when I moved to Merseyside 2 years ago, and one of the assessments in order to get into Merseyside Fire Rescue is your ability to swim.
What an intelligent test to give you, because otherwise we have a fire service full of people that can't do water rescue, swift water rescue.
Yeah, and so I think often it reflects the nature of the risk in the area. I mean, particularly in Merseyside, we've got a quite a big coastal risk. Mm-hmm. And so that's definitely part of it. An airport which, the final approach for the planes is over the River Mersey. And so, the potential for something quite catastrophic and the responsibility to respond, involves a good proportion of the Merseyside Fire and Rescue. So there is an obligation for us to be able to have personnel who can respond to that.
But I'm going to go out on a limb and say that every UK Fire and Rescue Service probably has a water rescue team. Bold statement, but I'm going to say they probably do.
Yeah. So in Lancashire, I was at Lancaster for 15 years, and we had a swiftwater rescue team, we were all swiftwater rescue trained because of the nature of the risk in the area. Mm-hmm. And we were one of a number of teams, but yeah, you're right in that it wasn't every station. Now, I might be wrong on this, but I'm sure it was a requirement historically for people to be able to swim to get into the fire service.
It used to be in some tests. I don't know as it was adopted unanimously, but I think the public would be astonished that we don't test people's ability to swim.
Yeah.
As a generic entry. I don't know why that conversation's not being had.
Yeah. It is a life skill.
I have with my daughter where I'm like, you need to be able to run a mile. You need to be able to climb over a wall.
Yeah.
You need to be able to swim. What was the 4th one? You need to be able to pull every member of the family this is a stupid one that I probably came up with as a firefighter. But that's when you talk about, you talk about bed sheets and
Hopefully not over the wall.
No,
That's good. I
but yeah,
just wanted to make
talk
sure
about
that
bed sheets and mechanical advantage. But yeah, climbing over a wall.
yeah,
What percentage of the public do you reckon be able to climb over a wall that was
yeah,
at least head height? I bet it's a small amount.
yeah.
I bet it's less than 50%.
I think
Uh,
if yeah, there's a functional fitness that you're referring to there, really, isn't it?
mhm,
You fit, but are you functionally fit? So you know that's part of whatever the life throws at you. If you're functionally fit, you're less likely to have a musculoskeletal injury. And I think that definitely has overlap with the fire service. Being functionally fit allows you the opportunity that when we, for instance, were RTC, road traffic collision. If we are in a tight space with a heavy piece of kit cutting something, you're far less likely to result in an injury if you're functionally fit. So
mhm,
I think that should definitely be part of the conversation. I think it's difficult. It's not impossible. I think it's difficult to have an occupational standard which is very much focused on that. But I think you could
mhm,
argue the drill ground assessment is about functional fitness.
mhm. Yeah.
And I think that's a reasonable test of functional fitness. There are elements, Swiftwater Rescue, RTC, the two we just mentioned, which maybe aren't part of that, but certainly I think will be part of discussions in the future. And then again, climate change. Being on a moorland fire for an extended period of time is physically
Hmm.
draining.
Yeah.
And so,
How are we
that's
measuring that? Yeah.
yeah. I mean, we did actually measure it, but we measured it for a short duration. We found it was interesting. We found it was very difficult to find a grassy hill in the Cotswolds, basically, because it's quite flat.
Mhm, yeah.
And so we had to search just for a grassy hill. We dressed people up. They had what would be they were in the structural
Yeah, we won't get
firefighting, but
into a
it's
PPE conversation, but yeah, they were wearing
yeah. And
structural
they
firefighting
had a
gear.
beater and they walked up the hill whilst beating and walking up the hill and walking up the hill. Now,
For how long?
obviously, we couldn't have people doing that for 3 hours, which or 4 hours
Why?
or 5 hours or even longer. But we did try to replicate as much as we could wildland firefighting. And whilst it did elicit a cardiovascular response, it wasn't as high as anything structural.
Mm.
Breathing apparatus and
Mhm.
ladders and hose running. So we didn't include it in the suite of tests which then formed the drill ground assessment. So yes, we did measure it as much as we could, and no, it wasn't part of that
Mhm.
final sort of test battery. So yeah,
Blood tests.
yes,
Some organisations, services, brigades have started doing blood testing
yeah,
for hormonal imbalances, identification of cancers, early identifications. Does that fit within the realm of conversations that has been had at Firefight? Where does that sit in what bucket? Because it kind of feels like it is associated, and I feel like there's a large disparity between what's done in different parts of the world. Spoke to Canadian firefighter again recently, with a few of them. They will
yeah,
get put off the run for a day, and they will go and have all of their bloods. They'll do the fitness test and a variety of things, the whole crew. Now, that may be, an ability of size. That may be an elitist thing that's just afforded to them because of the size of their organization and logistical capabilities and financial abilities. But I don't think we're way off that in the
mm.
UK. Like, what do you see as the adoption of blood testing so far? Do you think
That's
we should or shouldn't
yeah.
be doing it? Is it worth it? And are we maybe a bit scared about what it might tell us?
I, I think all those things, but I think inevitably what's happening is it's a bit of a it can be a bit of a ground up approach. I think with technology is moving so quickly, glucose monitors being a good example.
Mm,
And the apps that you have that complement these. And I think there are caveats and I think there are things that you've got to be aware of. But I think they do potentially have their place and potentially in the fire service. I think understanding particularly your blood sugar, I think your individual response to food, and I think understanding things such as, so if we're looking at metrics more broadly, I think understanding, your sleep behaviors. I think, what else? There are markers in the blood which will give you an indication of inflammation. And some of those markers I looked at in my research. The problem with that is that it's difficult with one test to understand what's really going on. So there needs to be a time series of tests and done at different times of day. And you need to understand the behaviors that are around those tests because it can affect the results, physical activity, food, sleep patterns. So I think, yes, I think they have a place for individuals to monitor over a period of time on an individual basis. I think it's very difficult for organizations to maybe do that and give confidence in the conversation that's going to happen. That said, an example I would give more recently, and it's again sort of a conversation partly in public health. So the World Health Organization have an ambition to eradicate, I got to get this right now, hepatitis, I'm going to say B, but I might be mistaken in that. I'm going to have to check that off. By 2030. Now, in doing that, they are testing. And so there are tests which have been offered through public health teams. An example being the Northwest Public Health Team. I think the Northwest have been into Cheshire Fire and Rescue. I know they had a liver screening because with hepatitis B, it affects your liver and increases the likelihood of liver cancer. Now, there is a marker that they can test for.
I think it's Hep C. Just have a look at it now. So the UK government is committed to World Health Organization's 2030 goal to eliminate viral hepatitis as a public health threat, implementing strategies, early detection, vaccination. Progress has been made. England on track to eliminate Hep C and having already eliminated mother-to-child Hep B.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think there are arguments for blood testing, and I think understanding what is offered by your local public health teams, I think it's really, really important to both fire service employees and then the public more generally to understand what you can do in order to address and identify these risks, because there are overlaps. So eradicating hepatitis C also, it's a liver function test. They will also do your blood pressure. They will also do a number of other things, which are red flags, which think that you can then go in and have more in-depth tests. So I think that's really important. And
one of the things they're going to do, they're commissioning a full course of hepatitis B vaccination for everyone entering the prison in England.
Right.
That's weird, isn't it?
Yeah.
Mandating not sterilizing people, but you know what I mean? You go to prison, you are guaranteed you're going to have a Hep B vaccination. I'm not sure how that was going to cope when it collides with people's perception of their own human rights, but it is more popular amongst prisons because people with regular drug use and stuff like that, struggling, people who inject drugs, have more higher cases of hepatitis. People that are involved in prisons are a higher likelihood they've been involved in drugs and unprotected sex and all that sort of jazz. That's a weird one. Okay. Insightful.
There's ethical conversations to be had.
There isn't there? It's a tough one, that is.
Yeah. Often, I mean, this is the battle with public health. It's understanding the ethics. So I just to add a bit of detail to that, because I think public health is important. Public health is really important, and having an understanding of public health generally, how to improve population health if the fire
Hmm.
service or public health more broadly
Yeah.
for the
A
fire
rising tide
services.
raises all the ships, isn't it? It just takes the weight off
Yeah.
all requirements of government, which you should do. Same with just personal values and morals and stuff like that. Less demand on policing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
How do we make people better citizens?
Yeah, and a public health approach in policing, as in the fire service and the ambulance service, I think is really important. I know it's a strategy which has been used up in Glasgow
Mm.
in order to try to reduce drug dependency,
Hmm.
and rather than criminalizing people, you try to actually look at the reasons why people find themselves in certain circumstances and try and have a public health approach. And I think that approach is useful in many different ways.
Hmm.
I got my public health registration as a practitioner a year and a half ago now, and that's means that I demonstrated that I could some evidence against a series of different standards, um, and working as a public health practitioner,
Hmm.
which is a bit odd in the fire service. But I think understanding public health is the key to reducing the likelihood of so many different um, problems, fire, accidents in the home. There are many benefits through improving population health, and so having an understanding of that, I think, is really important.
I want to change gears
Yeah,
into sleep. Should we have a napping policy?
we should have a fatigue risk management policy.
Okay, what's that for people that can't keep up with
So,
the
for
clever
anybody
words?
that's really more interested in that, I would mention a study called the cutoffs study, and
Mhm.
that's a study that's been commissioned by the ambulance service. I think there's 4 ambulance trusts. It's a lady we had, a professor of, I'm going to say population public health, but it might be wrong. It might be something different to that. She's from the University of East Anglia, and let me just check on
Let me have a look.
her name. Um,
Catnap, so
bear with me.
university. Uh,
Bear with me a moment. So Professor Chris D. Sanderson, we had
okay.
invited her to our FIFA conference a couple of years ago now. She was commissioned by the ambulance service to look into um, fatigue within the ambulance service and what interventions could be considered in order to improve health, but specifically targeting fatigue. There'd been a couple of nasty incidents whilst driving blue lights, and
Hmm.
fatigue was a contributing factor to what happened.
Definitely.
And so this study was commissioned. And what I really liked about it was using a public health framework. So it was really taking all of the factors at work, because a lot of shift workers in the fire service are a good example of this. We do things outside of the fire service.
Yeah.
So,
Because we
you
ain't got
know,
enough money and everything
yeah,
else, and we got a lot of
and
time off, and we're
yeah,
curious problem solvers.
yeah, a lot of it's supplementing wage. We have responsibilities elsewhere. There are
Hmm.
lots of factors that work into fatigue broadly. And so, what I liked about this study was it took all those in a very collaborative way
Hmm.
into consideration. So instead of saying, right, okay, well, you're on duty at it's 8:30, you're on duty at, I don't know, 6
7 till 7,
o'clock.
whatever. Yeah.
You turn off for work and you're ready to go.
Hmm.
Right, okay. But you do a night shift and then you're taking the children to school, and
Yeah.
okay, right. And then there are other things. And then before you know it, you've only got a couple of hours sleep, and then you pick the children up and then you're back in work.
Yep.
And so there was an opportunity there for an understanding and having a conversation about how can you manage what's happening at home, what's happening in work, what's happening elsewhere. How can you manage all those so that you can empower your employees to be in the best shape whilst they're in
Hmm.
work? So understanding sleep behaviors, understanding the effects of fatigue, understanding your own biology, because
Hmm.
individuals vary hugely on how we sleep, when we sleep, our needs for sleep.
Hmm.
So, I mean, we all have a universal need for sleep, but how much sleep we need and
Hmm.
we are most best at sleep. So,
Hmm.
chronotype,
Hmm.
it varies considerably between individuals. So, if you can give people an understanding of their chronotype, their own biology, give them an understanding of what's important to set yourself up for the best opportunity for a good night's sleep, conversations at home, conversations at work, setting up the workplace. Um,
What would you say to those rare people that want to get rid of beds?
well, I would say why.
Because I don't want my fire, because police don't have them, ambulance don't have them. I pay you to be at work. There's things I can get you to do. You want something to do, I'll give you something to do.
Yeah, and I mean, I it's an interesting one, isn't it?
Not my thoughts, obviously, but
The police have a physical presence. The ambulance service are incredibly busy. Um,
I think the ambulance service is like the abused cousin. I think just because they, in my words, not yours, treat their staff poorly in terms of sleep and care. And my brother-in-law is paramedic. Um, I look at the longevity stuff on how long their careers last. They ain't very long by comparison. I think the average is like 11 years. You know what I mean? I don't think it's sustainable. I don't think the way that we treat them is good. I don't think
so
they are able to show up as the best versions of themselves for the public because
I don't
of.
know specifics, but I do know that it does vary between ambulance trusts as
Yeah.
to what they allow or don't allow regarding rest. Um, and what I don't understand why some fire services have beds and some fire services don't. Now, I do understand why we have a work routine and there are expectations as to what you want people to achieve in a working day. I do understand that, but I don't understand why you don't have beds. I do understand why you would communicate with your employees regarding what you expect in response times, and that's
Hmm.
clearly monitored, and what the expectations are. I so I do understand why you need robust policies in certain things.
Yeah, because
I don't
everyone will try and
understand
find a way
why,
to abuse things. If not, you've got
yeah,
to have some guardrails.
I don't understand why you don't um, enable your employees to be as rested as they possibly can.
They can
Now,
do enough.
you could end up, well, let's not call it a bed. Then, whatever that may be, then why wouldn't you want your employees to be as healthy and as rested as they could be? Now, if our role changes and there seems to be constant conversations regarding that, then
Hmm.
but in the our current set of circumstances, I don't understand why we don't have, or all fire services don't have now. That there are reasons for that. I
Hmm.
and that is difficult, but I think being as rested and as little sleep disruption as possible. Let's
Hmm.
call it, I mean, it's called circadian disruption. But if you can mitigate the effects of sleep work of shift work, the more you mitigate the effects of shift work, the better your
Hmm.
health will
I
be.
love it in
Uh,
certain services where you're on a certain truck and that will be assigned to a certain dorm so they don't wake the other dorm up when you get turned out. And some people are like, oh, I'm up, everybody's up. I'm like, I don't think, I think I get it from a teamwork perspective, but that's just about crew rotation on vehicles and skill sets. I think getting people up arbitrarily for no reason, I don't, I don't think that's justifiable when technology would allow different.
yeah, I mean, sometimes there are um, station level, should we say, reasons why people have. they want more control about what individuals do, and managing that, but I do think that, you've got to manage individuals and not have blanket policies because of certain things. I think you've got to empower your managers to be able to get the best out of their employees on station. And I think the more responsibility, the better control, with checks and balances. I just think it's you can either do things to people or you can do things with people. And I think it's always better to take people on the journey with you. And I'm not, this is not just fitness. I think fitness is a good example, because the more you do fitness to people, the more they push back. But I think if you take them on a journey where they're going to be healthier, happier, and ultimately retire in a better place, when you communicate it in those terms, I think you're going to get a less pushback. So I think communication and sort of relationships and conversations are so important in all of these ways.
Mate, I think I absolutely love that. I want to force us into a close. I think it's been speaking for 2 hours. It's so easy. It's so easy. You blink and 2 hours will just go by. I want to be respectful of the listener, but also I'd love to have you back on for a future conversation, because I think this is very much an evolving task, whether it be yourself or another member of the team or something like that. As we close, I wanted to force you into a corner, if you'll allow me to.
Yeah.
What do you think is the biggest challenge facing firefighters' health and well-being when it comes to the expectations of the role and the longevity of it at the minute? If you were horizon scanning for those big things that we haven't seemed to have solved for, what's the place that we should be placing our attention?
I think climate change is a huge concern.
Okay.
And I think, for instance, rising sea levels, extreme weather, I think population movement, I think all these things are massively destabilizing, and the fire service is involved when destabilization happens in whatever form that is. Yeah. The fire service are there. We're a rescue organization, and we are there. And I think we are very small in numbers and in equipment. And I think sometimes that is forgotten, because we cover a lot of bases. I think our skill sets are broad, and I think we can,
you know what you call the ambulance service for, and you know what you call the police for. Everything else, you call the fire and rescue service usually for inland, populations. We're kind of the catch-all for the other stuff.
So I think in that respect, we need to take these things really seriously, and that requires a lot of effort and a lot of honesty, I think, in what it ultimately involves. I think a lot of the things that happen, and I would recommend a book by Nicholas Taleb called The Black Swan.
Oh, Black Swan events. Oh, mate.
And I think Black Swan events, and the ones that you don't know about, because I think history is poor at recalling what Black Swan events actually truly the effect that they've had. And I think the impact of the highly improbable. Climate change is the biggest black swan that is coming our way. So I think we really need to be honest about what that's going to mean for the fire service.
Mate, absolutely love that. Dr. Phil Turner, been an absolute pleasure, brother. I would love to have you on again in the future. Please send my love to all of the family, and I look forward to catching up with you soon.
Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed the conversation, Pete.
Well, that's it for today, folks. Hope you took a lot away from that episode. We started the Firefighters podcast to develop, inspire, connect, motivate, represent, and most importantly, celebrate the world of incredible emergency services operators and the wider sector through this series of wide-ranging conversations. We really love creating this podcast and bringing it to so many people. Did you know you can also find these on YouTube? We do a lot of video podcasts now. You can head over to our YouTube page and follow, subscribe there. And as a final ask from us, whatever platform you're on, please rate the podcast. It really helps us as a key performance indicator to reach more and more people. I've been your host, Pete Wakefield. This has been the Firefighters Podcast. And wherever you are in the world, please stay safe, be happy, live with intention, and where possible, please remember and support your firefighters and first responders. I'll see you next time.